I know as soon as I start talking, we'll have some more people join, but at the moment, it's gone quiet. So I might make a start. So I will start with introducing myself. So I am Kimberley James. I am the collections manager here at Gilbert White's House and Gardens in Selborne, where I'm speaking to you from today. Um, this is part of our Heritage Open Day program. So maybe some of you joined us today and were part of the very, very many people who visited today. It was really lovely to see so many people visit us today. This is also part of our 70th anniversary celebrations. So for those who don't know, the museum opened on the 6th of September 1955. So we've just turned 70 years old. And what with the anniversary, with Heritage Open Days, theme this year being architecture, it seemed like a really good excuse to do a little bit of a talk about the many, many ages of the house, because this house is a real mishmash of different styles and ages. And if anybody knows the house well, you know that every time you enter a room, you are in a completely different century. And so I thought this might be a good opportunity to try and walk sort of chronologically round the house and go from basically try and build the house as it grew over time. So, what to do, I will make a start. So, I'm going to caveat that with a lot of my research has come out of one fantastic study that was done by Marion Jones in the 1980s. And they have put in a huge amount of research into the makeup of the house. And that was probably my main source, but works have been done by various architects over the decades. So it's sort of pulled from here, there, and everywhere. But if anybody's interested, I will put a link perhaps in the email with the recording to that study, because it is very, very thorough and very worth a read if this is something, if you want a little bit more detail. So this diagram was taken from that report and has sort of the rough layout of the house and the various different segments there within, and you can see just sort of how sprawling the house is. And this is just the ground floor. So we're going to start here in what we've got called the hall. The other thing I'm going to say is, obviously, over the past 400 years, 500 years or so, obviously every family, every generation of staff call the room something different. So I'm going to try and keep my terminology of the rooms fairly succinct. But this is what we would call the little parlour. This is now the orientation room. The shop is in this sort of area here. You've got the old kitchen here, the great parlour, it's always called the great parlour, Bell's library, the long corridor, and then this is the discovery room where we have our temporary exhibitions. Currently a very good exhibition on our 70th anniversary. Do come and see it if you can. So I will move on to talk about the very early days of the house. So I'm sure, by the way, some of these pictures, if anybody's been in the house recently, these pictures are probably about 10 years old. So a nice flashback to how the little parlour used to look. So the house is called the Wakes, and it's called the Wakes because before the White family lived there, a family called the Wakes lived there. And whether that was in the 17th century or the 16th century, I'm not sure that anybody is perfectly sure, but I would have said probably the 17th century. There was a family called the Wakes. The house's exact date is unknown, but it would have been somewhere within the 1500s, and it would have been the room that we now call the little parlour, just that room, and it would have been a hall open up to the rafters. So quite a simple, one-roomed dwelling, opened up to the rafters, timber clad, and that is the original house. So we've all there's another view. So the staircase that a lot of people are used to is really quite a recent addition to the house. So that would not have been there. But some of the features that you do see in the house, like some more people joining, the timber clad of the ceiling and the potentially some of the pillars as well, give you an idea of what it might have been like. And there's some debate over whether the mantelpiece was where the fireplace is original, or whether that was added a little bit later. And here we have it. The one little room. I don't think this chimney is in the right place in this image, but this is sort of on the floor plan of the house, the little parlour or the hall, the original parts of the house. So it's been very difficult to find images from before Gilbert White lived here. So I've made my own by basically crossing out the bits that we don't want to look at. So in the 17th century, the house began to grow. And the first thing that was added is this little outshoot. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this little outshoot that came off the back of the hall or the little parlour, which is still there, but it's not quite got that sloping roof than it does in this picture. And that was added in sort of the first half of the 17th century. All the rest of the house was still not there yet. And then in the second half of the 17th century, the house starts to take on the shape that we know today. Ignore these two chimneys here, but so this is the bit, so if you're going up the staircase towards the bedchamber, you'll know these stairs. Here is what we call the old kitchen, Gilbert White's bedchamber. And so this part of the house was added in the late 17th century and starts to form what is sort of recognisably Gilbert White's house. And then we move further into the 18th century. This is an image of Gilbert White's house whilst he was living in it. So we haven't quite reached Gilbert White yet, but I thought I'd pop this picture here. So this was painted by the illustrator of the Natural History of Selborne, Samuel Hieronymus Grimm. And if you notice, we have the house as we know it. There's the stair turret, the door that leads out into the garden, and the solar is here with the kitchen and the bedchamber. But you'll see here, there's a little extra bit of building there. Now, up until very recently, when I started really getting stuck into the plan of the house, if you've ever done a house tour with me, I would have said, oh, when Gilbert White lived in this house as a child, it was essentially a 2 up, 2 down. It was what we know as the little parlour, the rooms behind and the rooms above, which is basically this bit here. And I would often joke, about how on earth they all fit such a large family in such a small house. The answer is they didn't, because there was more to the house than that. There was a little wing that's sort of hidden here, which followed the footprint of basically where the Regency part of the building is now. So that the orientation room, or the tea parlor, if you remember it as the tea parlor, was, and it followed roughly that footprint. And it might have been just the ground floor, or it might have been 2 stories, but there was definitely some sort of building here. And actually, in this image, you can actually see the chimneys. And so there was definitely more to the house than I realised when I was talking. I'd always been led to believe that the part of the building that's there now was there from the 1790s onwards. So that's been exciting. It's been good to know that I've been basically telling people the wrong things for, years. But that's really exciting because that does explain how the house worked a little bit better, and sort of solves the mysteries about where the kitchen was and where everybody slept. So we start moving into the period where the White family move into the Wakes. The gentleman that you're all looking at here is Gilbert White Senior. So Gilbert White, the naturalist's grandfather. And Gilbert White Senior bought the Wakes in the 1720s as somewhere for his family to live in the occasion that he was no longer able to be the vicar of Selborne. So he and his family had lived in Selborne Vicarage across the road from the Wakes for decades. But whether he was suffering ill health or just knew that he was growing elderly and maybe needed a backup plan, he bought the Wakes, and then he died in 1726. And his family had to move out of the vicarage to make way for the new vicar, and they moved into the Wakes next door. So during that period, so the 1720s, the people that lived in the Wakes was Rebecca White, so that's Gilbert Senior's wife, and Gilbert White's grandmother, and she was the owner of the house. And she lived there with 2 of her 5 children, Elizabeth, and Dorothea, who were both Gilbert White's aunts. And at that time unmarried. They actually got married on the same day, both to vicars, as the children of vicars often do. And Dorothea White married the new vicar of Selborne. So she basically moved out from the vicarage, moved into the Wakes, and then moved back into the vicarage. And Elizabeth White married a cousin. It was the 18th century, it happens. Charles White, and he'll pop up again in a little bit. So at this point in the 1720s, there's 3 women living in the house. But when Elizabeth and Dorothea move out, obviously Rebecca is now living alone. So this is the house that they would have lived in. It would have been this nice L-shaped house, but we are missing a bit because this diagram doesn't include this little bit that people seem to have forgot existed, because there's a early, oh my gosh, I got my decades mixed up, a late 18th century wing of the house now on that site. So these are the residents of the Wakes between 1728 and 1758. So we have Rebecca White, Gilbert White's grandmother. She is the owner of the house right up until her death in 1755. And then we have Gilbert White's father. He dies in 1758. And at that point, you would think, now Gilbert White is the owner of the house. Not the case. So when Rebecca White dies, the house is the house passes to not John, but to her daughter Elizabeth and her husband Charles. And Charles White dies in 1764, and that is when Gilbert White becomes the owner of the Wakes. So, and Gilbert White at this point is 44 years old. So it takes him until, he's by 18th century standards, well into middle age before he becomes a homeowner. And actually, during that small period where his father passes away, but he yet isn't the owner of the Wakes, he actually pays rent to his uncle to live there. But anyway, so we have John is living there. Anne, Gilbert White's mother, is living there. She dies in 1738. And then we have Gilbert. And then we have his huge list of brothers and sisters. Obviously, they weren't all living there to 1958, but there's quite a big age gap between Gilbert and his youngest brother, Henry. There's 13 years between the two of them. So even when Gilbert White was an adult, he still would have had child siblings living in the house, plus servants. So you can see why having this sort of mystery wing of the house was so important, because if we take that away, we literally have what's known as Gilbert White's bedroom, the bedchamber, which was there in the at this period. But we know that the family used it as a sitting room, which leaves what we call the study and the rooms in the attics for 3 adults, 8 children and servants. It's, I know that people like to, share rooms and share beds, but, you're not having an, 18-year-old Gilbert sharing a room with his 5-year-old brother and all of the siblings in between. There must have been more room than what the house seems to have had. So another of Grimm's pictures, and here you can see in the corner, so here's the house, what we know of it. You can see a little roof next to what we call the old kitchen, and that we think is sort of like a pantry or a scullery. Sort of, it'll be a low roofed building, and then behind it you can see the sort of taller building which would have housed the extra bedrooms and the kitchen. And then I've got the diagram from the report, and I've basically, you have to sort of ignore this bit because this is where the old bit would have been, but this actual bit will come to a little bit later because it's from 1910. But that gives you an idea of sort of the size of the house at this point. So from about 1758, Gilbert White, although he might not own the house, is head of the household. And this is roughly the house that he would have had. But just like every owner of your house, you want to modernise, you want more space. And in 1777, after much deliberation of, I think I'm going to extend the house, or no, maybe I'm not going to, or no, he finally decides, after seeing his little brother Harry's new parlour, that he is going to build a parlour onto the side of the house. He will, but first, I've forgotten I'd included this. We're going to talk a little bit about the rooms in Gilbert White's house. So the study. The museum has the study on the first floor, and by what I have read, I think actually Gilbert White's study is in this wing that we know very little about. It might have actually been on the ground floor or the first floor, but it overlooked the high street, we think. So not dissimilar to where the study is now, but the room that we call the study was almost certainly used as a bedroom during Gilbert White's time. And actually, I don't know whether the room's been read the whole time that I've been at the museum, but he does refer to the red bedroom. So it could be that we've got it right there with the colour, which would have been a stroke of luck. The kitchen. The old kitchen, as we call it, was actually the White family's dining room, and it would have looked very different from the room that we have that you can see in the picture. For one thing, the floor wouldn't have been lowered; it would have been level with the rest of the house, so you wouldn't have to go down some steps to visit. And what I've learnt is that I always had assumed that the floor was lowered by one of the either Victorian or Edwardian families that lived in the house that wanted taller furniture. Apparently, it was lowered in the 1960s. As I say, I don't have a huge, other than this Marion Jones report, any other mention of it being done whilst the museum was open. But yeah, he seems to think it was done fairly recently. And as he was writing it in the 80s, the people would have been around that would have known. But I'd always assumed that it had been done much earlier than that. Anyway, the room that we call the old kitchen most certainly was used as a dining room in Gilbert White's time. And we have references to Gilbert White talking about planting around the dining room, and sort of what he's describing sounds a lot like where we would call the old kitchen. And behind the lovely mannequin in the blue dress is a little alcove, which almost certainly was a door that led to a little pantry that was very small, small enough that you could see the window behind the mannequin in the purple dress. You would have been able to see daylight out of that window, and that the kitchen would have been somewhere else in the house. We know that it was a fairly large kitchen by the sound of things. He talks about there being a hearth, there being sort of common space for servants to sit, and that there was a buttery and a pantry. So it would have been a fairly sizable room, and not detached from the house. Like I've heard some theories that it might be a one of those kitchens that could burn down independently, but it sounds like it was very much within the house, and probably accessed either via the little corridor there, or by the little parlour. So actually a bit of a convoluted way to get the food from the kitchen to the dining room, but I don't think enough of the house survives for us to be absolutely sure what the layout of that extra wing was. But there's some really interesting ideas about it following the footprint of the cellar below, because the cellar below the 1794 wing doesn't quite match the floor print of the cellar, so the chances are that it followed the footprint of the cellar, which again was surprising to me, because I was assumed that the cellar dated from the same time as the wing, and that the cellar that goes just letting another person in, the cellar that goes from just next to this room all the way through to the great parlour was our oldest cellar, but maybe not. So, and then I would just say, but basically, the dining room would have been level. It would have been, a fairly pleasant room. It's got two very large windows, and obviously in those days it would have had three. And nice access to the garden. I think Gilbert White talks about, because obviously Baker's Hill starts going up from that point, about digging around the house to make sure that all the windows have plenty of light. Which actually, if you've ever been in the old kitchen in December in the afternoon, it's very, very dark in there. I think it would have made quite a nice homely evening setting though, with all the candles burning. So the this part of the house is often referred to as the solar, um, and is probably the most sort of, if you're looking at the back of the house, the most characteristically sort of, authentic part of the house. So you can see all the marmstone and the brickwork, which is so sort of common for buildings in the sort of Selborne, Hampshire area. This is what we call the bedchamber, and it absolutely was used as a bedroom by Gilbert White. He used it as his bedroom, but it was also used as a parlour during the family's time there, because we see in letters that Gilbert White turns it from a parlour into a bedroom. But there's also a few references to suggest that maybe it was used as a bedroom at other times as well, because Gilbert White mentions about planting around the dining room, and then also planting where his father can see the flowers from the bedroom, and obviously it's on top of the dining room. So it could be that he was planting for both vistas. The the bedchamber would have made an absolutely lovely sitting room, because it has the best views and the best light in all of the house, which makes it such a shame that we have to have the shutters shut 24/7 to protect the bed hangings, because it's a really pleasant room when the shutters are open. You'll be familiar, if you know the house, with the staircase that goes along this stair turret, which is mainly original to the 17th century, but it does seem that as modifications to the house was being made, modifications have been made to the staircase. So it doesn't follow the exact same pattern as it perhaps did in the 17th century, because it attaches to rooms that didn't exist in the 17th and 18th century. And then I'll also move on to the stable yard. This is a very nice picture from 2018. But Gilbert White was very much in charge of how the stable yard looked. So the stable block, which is now our cafe, was added, we think, in around 1764. We can't know exactly, because the stone that probably would have said the date has worn away. So, but we think it's around 1764, and then the brew house was added. We know for sure in 1765. Obviously, we are now brewing again in Gilbert White's brew house, so it's back to its original purpose. And if you're ever inside the cafe, you can see all the loose boxes and the original timbers and structure of that of the stable. And he also would have had a loo out there, so he had an outhouse out here. That there's some references to his ways of hiding the loo with various shrubs and trees, and also hiding other people, so other neighbours' loos with strategic trees, so that he couldn't see into neighbours' privies either. But it's always tricky with Gilbert White is really unhelpful with his references around the house and the garden, because he never calls anything by the same name. I was talking to our old head gardener, David Standing, briefly about this, but more about the garden, and sort of saying about how confusing it is that so many rooms are called so many different things. And he absolutely agreed, because Gilbert White will refer to one part of the garden by four different names, sort of interchangeably, which makes mapping out Gilbert White's garden very, very difficult. And it's basically been his life's work trying to work it out. So in 1777, Gilbert White decides to add a room to the house to put his mark on the house, and he builds the Great Parlour. Now, the Great Parlour today is not the same as it would have been in Gilbert White's day. It has been altered, but we know a lot about the making of it. We even know the name of the bricklayer. In fact, I can. It's Kemp, George Kemp. There we go. And the bricks were from Harting and Selborne. The timber was from Winchester. We know that he used the hair from his dog Rover to thicken the plaster. We know that it took ages for the plaster to dry because the weather was so bad. So we know quite a lot about how the room came together through Gilbert White's letters. It took about 3 years to finish. He started it in the summer of 1777, and he sort of starts putting the final touches and starts actually living in it in the 1780s. So the very early part of the 1780s. So it took a while to get there, but it was a room that he could host friends, family in, and was very fashionable. And would have had this amazing view from the window. I mean, the one thing that hasn't changed is the view. Obviously, the window alcove here is much more modern. But if you imagine this with sash windows looking out onto the park, you would get an idea of what the house would have looked like. And here it is. So this image, I think, is from 1803. So you need to ignore again the two top chimneys because they are not yet here, but this is what the Great Parlour would have looked like from the outside when Gilbert White first built it. And this is a pretty good idea of what the house would have looked like at the end of Gilbert White's life. So you have the outshoot is still there with the sloping roof, the solar and the stair turret are still there, but with this mystery wing that's just hidden out of view for us to properly understand what it would have looked like. And here's an idea of what the house would have looked like in Gilbert White's ownership. And it's got the little pantry on this one, which is helpful. So post Gilbert White. So Gilbert White dies in 1793. And the house passes to Gilbert White's brother Benjamin, who dies the year later. So it's a little bit unclear who exactly is living in the house during this time. It seems to be that it was available to any member of the very, very large White family who needed it. And I think it went through Benjamin's sons, John, and his descendants. So we know that at least in the early 19th century, Gilbert White's great niece Mary was living in there, and then her niece Georgiana was living there as well in the 19th century. So once again, the house went to the women of the White family, and they lived there. But whoever it was, the minute that they got their hands on the house, they decided to demolish the mystery wing with that Gilbert White had his study in, and the bedrooms and the kitchen, and to build a proper dining room. So what we now call the orientation room. So that first room you come into the museum, and also the Gilbert White Legacy room were added to the house, and they are proper sort of late 18th century Regency style rooms. This is what it looks like right now. So it's very museumy, but you can see it is a beautiful, beautiful room, and would have probably been much nicer to sit in and have your meal in than the sort of fairly dark old kitchen. And they turned the old kitchen into a kitchen, and it was either the Whites or the next family that lived there that did that. But we believe from this point, this was the dining room, and the old kitchen became a kitchen. So they basically swapped the rooms' purposes. So this room and the room above were added in roughly 1794. We don't have the exact dates, but it seems to be that it was definitely there by 1800. So the Whites leave the Wakes in 1839. The house is vacant for 3 years, and then it is bought from the White family by Professor Thomas Bell. And he buys it in 1844, along with some of the furniture and some of Gilbert White's letters. And he does that because he is a Gilbert White super fan. And what better to do than to buy the house of your hero? So he buys it, and he lives in the house for about 40 years. So he lives there all the way up to his death in 1880. He is very interesting in his own right. He actually edits a copy of the natural history of Selborne from the Wakes. And some of the reason that some of the letters and furniture that we have still survive is thanks to Thomas Bell, because he bought furniture and letters off of the family and kept them and published them. So we've got a lot to thank Bell for. But the biggest thing is his additions to the house. Still today, this room is called Bell's Library because it is the library added to the house by Bell. So this room, we think, was built pretty much immediately after Bell moved in. So it was around 1844 that it was added, and it was added to be a library, a study, and was added next to the great parlour, making the house a little bit longer towards the north side of the house. And here it is in an illustration. So here we can see this is the 1794 wing has added with its tall chimneys. And then we have here Bell's Library with its very distinctive circular bay window, which you can still sit in today. But Bell's was slightly different. You could actually, it was a door. You could leave out of it, and there you can see the great parlour still very much the same as what it was in Gilbert White's time, and the rest of the house looking fairly similar to how it would have been in Gilbert White's day. And we're beginning to get into the realms of photographs, which is exciting. So this is a little bit later. This is probably, I think this photo was sort of photo slash I think it's been penned over, but around sort of the 1870s, I think this image is from. So you can see Bell's Library. I've got an arrow pointing to it with the door, which looks like it's ajar. And this greenhouse has been added, and there will be a greenhouse on this site for basically the next 100 or so years. And you'll see as we go along, it sort of changes slightly every so often. But this is the house as Bell would have known it, but you can still see here that this little pantry coming off the old kitchen is still there. This sort of little outshoot, which is where that door that's now been closed off would have led to. Lots and lots of ivy on the house as well, lots of foliage, and the garden looks completely different to both how Gilbert White would have had it and to how it is today. And this is a picture from 1877 from the front of the house. Very few photographs or pictures from the front of the house, but this gives us a little idea of what it might have been. So this is the 1794 addition to the house. This is a little window which you can't really see now, but it's basically on top of the bedchamber. There's a little attic room up there. These are the windows that are in the study, and you can see that the front door used to be between the two windows in the little parlour. Not quite where they are now, where they are at the moment. So there you go. That's the house as it was in the 1870s whilst Belle was living there. Then things start getting complicated. So Belle dies in 1880 and the house is sold to the Bradfords. And it seems like two members of the Bradford family had it between 1880 and 1892. And then they sold it to a Mr. Reed, who had it for a very short time, 1892 till 1895. But in that time, a lot of changes happened to the house. So it's now looking a little bit more like the house we know today. So they've got a very large and very fancy greenhouse here that attaches to the house, and the door that leaves Belle's library now probably was added at this point. And you'll also see a whole first floor has been added during this time as well. So we have what's now the Pontings room, but the alcove hasn't been added yet, and the Francotes gallery is here and the Pontings room is here. So these two Oates galleries have been added. This one looks very similar to how it does today, but this one, some changes are still to come. And you will have noticed as well that this little outshoot has now grown a second floor, but it's not quite the same as it is now. So that staircase that comes down into the little parlour has not been added yet. So there's a corridor to link up to these new stories, but the staircase situation is not quite the same as it is today, because these windows are not the same as they are today. And there's also this mystery little window, which I always find kind of curious. And I wonder whether there was a 17th century room here that's now been lost because of the staircase that got added later on. So a lot of changes in this time. Here's the back end of the greenhouse. And this window is now a door that leads to a fire escape. But here we have the front of the house. And again, looking a little bit more recognisable from the front, but not quite. We've still got almost half the length still to be added on. But that was a lot of changes for basically 15 years and 3 owners that made a huge amount of change in a very short amount of time. During that time as well, some changes were made to the Great Parlour. This is a fantastic Victorian interior of the Great Parlour. When I say Victorian, I don't think it is Victorian. I think this is actually Edwardian, and this photo was taken slightly after the time I'm about to tell you about. Partly. So we think that Reed, so the second owner of this time, partitioned the Great Parlour in order to create a corridor. So at this point, the long corridor, the nice one with the blue tiles, does not exist. And we think that he partitioned it to create a corridor. And the reason I think that this is later on is because the next owner of the house almost completely instantaneously undid that change and reopened up the great parlour and built the long corridor. And it looks to me like they're not using the doors here. So obviously they're using the corridor rather than the doors. And I wonder whether this partition here is what's left of Reed's attempt of creating a corridor through the house, because the house was set up a little bit sort of, I suppose, for a late Victorian family, old fashionedly, where you'd go from room to room to room, as opposed to having a corridor. And I suppose if you wanted a little bit of privacy whilst you're sitting in your parlour, to have a closed off passageway would have been nice. But also it's really nice to see what the great parlour, there's so much stuff in it. I can't get over how much stuff. And also the sadness of the mantelpiece that we've lost. Because we now have a faux marble mantelpiece, but it's not as fancy as that. So yeah, have to work out. Next talk is try and work out who took away all the features that I would have liked to still have in the house. So the next people that moved in between 1895 and 1902, so the Mr. Reed sold it to Mr. Parkin, and Mr. Parkin sold it to Mr. Shaw. Again, this is in the space of 7 years, two more owners and two and more really, really drastic changes to the house. So we have now got this extension alcove in the great parlour, so this sort of quite iconic square window. But the first floor hasn't come up to meet it. Instead, it's got a very nice balcony space. And they haven't quite yet got the middle staircase, but what they have got is this huge kitchen block that they've added to the house, which is not the kitchen and servants block that we have now. It is a addition to the house that will be changed in a matter of years' time. So again, a huge amount of changes happening in a very, very short amount of time here. But they're sort of paving the way for the last extension to the house. The next family to live in the house were called the Pears. And they lived in the house between 1903 and 1910. And they added what we call the discovery room. And here's a picture of how it is today as a exhibition room. They added it as a billiard room, because what house isn't complete without a billiard room, really? So that was around 1903. They also added the long corridor. Again, here it is today. Interestingly, until I think the late 1990s, it might have been the early 2000s, the tiles that are probably, everybody is always complimenting us on our tiles, were covered up. They were exposed in the 1990s, early 2000s, when the team here were doing some renovation work and moved the board to reveal these amazing blue tiles. So what must have happened is the Pears family liked the tiles, but the next family along did not, and so covered them up. And we didn't know they were there. But obviously, for the last 20 or so years, they've been on display proudly. So those were the Pears' major addition. So they added a whole new wing on either side of the house. So the billiard room to the north and the servants' quarters to the south, and added to the front of the house the corridor to link up from the little parlour or the entrance hall to the thing. I think they also added the porch. Yes, they did. So this picture is from the 50s. It's not from the 1900s, but it was the closest I could get of showing you what they added. So the big addition to the house. So basically, if you're coming in from the Alton side of the high street, the first part of the house you see, they added that whole wing. So the billiard room and the bedrooms above. They also added a bathroom and a toilet, which incidentally I'm currently in. So they, I don't know whether there was a bathroom there, a proper bathroom there before, but the house bathroom is in this part of the house. They added the long corridor, and you can see the windows there on the front of the house, and they added the porch that would have is still the front door to the house. And I think you'll obviously this picture is from the 50s, but you know it's what we know today. Oh yeah, and this is from the other side. So they added, again, this is the back end of the billiard room, and you can see here now how the greenhouse attaches to the house. So they've kept the greenhouse. They've extended, obviously didn't like the balcony, so they've extended the French windows to match the alcove of the great parlour, and they've added this big staircase and made this huge big window and got rid of the little strange extra window that was in that corner there in the last picture. So they've essentially almost completed the house to how we know it today. And then we move on to the final family, the Bibbies. And the Bibbies had the house from 1910 to 1953. And they didn't make too many changes. The big change they did make, though, was in adding the servants' block here. And actually, if you are looking up at the just under the window, you can see the matriarch of the family, Hilda Bibby's initials and the year 1910. So we know exactly when this room was when this wing was built. Almost immediately, the minute they moved in, basically, they started on this improvement, which probably incorporated the servants' wing that had been added in the late 19th century and just extended it. Obviously had a lot of servants that they needed to house. The Bibbies lived there for 40 odd years, and people still remember them. People that wanted to come and see Gilbert White's house would often knock on the door and have it answered by Mrs. Bibby. In fact, I was giving a house tour yesterday, and some of the group knew Mrs. Bibby's granddaughter. And so the house, the last owners of the house are still in very much in memory. Many years ago, a visitor said that she remembered coming to the house as a child when Mrs. Bibby owned it. And the only thing that I can remember from that conversation is that she said that what is now the old kitchen was used as a schoolroom during that time, which would have been a very dark and damp place for a schoolroom. So Mrs. Bibby died in 1953, and once again, the house came up for sale. Obviously, it has had many, many changes and grown significantly since Gilbert White lived there. So, but a Gilbert White trust was founded, and they tried to purchase the house for a huge sum of £12,500. Bearing in mind, it was this huge house, 25 acres of grounds, and several cottages within the village were included in that. They wanted to raise, I think, £25,000 in total to include costs to renovate it into a Gilbert White museum. Their requests were answered when Robert Washington Oates responded to their letters and offered to help fund the project, with the understanding that his family would also be honoured and remembered. And in September, the museum opened. Robert Washington Oates is in this picture, but he is being concealed by Harry Britton here. So this is the Duke of Wellington. This is John Darlington. He was the vicar at the time. These are a couple of trustees. Robert Washington Oates is hidden there. And then a couple more trustees, Lord and Lady Selborne. And on the very end is William Gaunt, who was the museum's first curator. So since the museum opened, there's been a few changes. I can't quite work out when the greenhouse went, but it was there in the 50s. But I haven't seen any other pictures of it. So it must have gone somewhere between the 50s and the 60s. But if you're ever at the museum and if you look up, you can actually see the outline of where it was on the wall. The only other changes that the museum have made to the house, in the 70s, our first field studies centre was added into the stable yard attached to Gilbert White Stables. And this was our education centre for many, many decades. I'm sure that many people will have memories of coming to do field study centres in this building. And it was only actually demolished in 2016 after being basically condemned for the best part of a decade. I mean, we weren't still using it for education, I should say, but it still stood until fairly recently. If anybody's been in the cafe recently and knows the sort of the more modern bit, this is where the old field study centre stood. So as you can see here, the greenhouse is gone, and in its place in the 1990s was added a wooden fire escape, which is still there. But that's probably the only real change that the museum has made to sort of the aesthetics of the house. In 2002, right at the far end of the grounds, we added our new field study centre, which was opened by King Charles III, then the Prince of Wales, in 2002. And that's where our education still happens today. And then between 2016 and 2018, we started working on the stable yard, partly to save it, because the stables was beginning to be really severely unstable, but also to give it a new lease of life so that visitors could actually see it. So here you see the very beginnings of work on the stables, and excitingly, you can't see this now because it's all brickwork, but you can see the marmstone, the same pattern as the houses and the brew houses in the brickwork, which is hidden. But the whole stable yard was sort of given a new lease of life sort of 5 or 6 years ago as part of that Heritage Lottery project. And so just to finish up, here is the house again, just as a little reminder. So from basically the 1500s through to 2018, there's been quite a lot of change. Hopefully, that's not been too confusing for anybody. I feel like it's a little bit difficult to do when not every age has got pictures, and it's a little bit hard to show. Hopefully, you all know the house well enough to be able to picture it. So I'm happy to try and answer anybody's questions. I really hope that you take a chance to see our 70 stories, 70 objects exhibition, because there's some, we're able to sort of go into a little bit more depth about the last 70 years and the exciting things that we've been able to do over those 70 years. And yeah, I really hope that you've enjoyed this session. So if you want to ask a question, you can pop it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, and then I will either, if you want to, you can read out your question, or I will read it out for you. Bombard you with information. Has anybody got any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and make yourself known if you do. If not, just to say thank you very much. Oh, that's an applause. I thought that was a hands up. Oh, thank you very much. Oh, Julian, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Or you can pop it in the chat. Oh, there you go.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Kimberley. Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm very interested by the about the lowering of the floor in the old kitchen.
Yeah, me too.
I'd assumed that it had happened years, or actually that was the original level, because the fireplace is down at the floor level.
So,
So,
sorry, yeah, you go.
no, go on, go on.
So you can see the floorboards, like the floorboard struts that have been taken away. So next time you're in, Claire, have a little look round
Tomorrow.
down by the stairs, and you can actually see where the floor's been lowered. Not by much, just a foot or so.
Yeah.
I had always assumed that it had been done, whilst all the other Victorians and Edwardians have been tinkering with the house. And I thought, well, it would have had very low headroom. I mean, if you think about the little parlour, that's got low headroom. And,
Yeah.
they probably had taller furniture. So I was really surprised as well to read in the Mary Jones report that it had happened in the 1960s. And I've sort of taken him from his word on it, just because he was writing this in the 80s, and it was quite fairly recent. Obviously, there's not that many people still there's not anybody who worked at the museum in the 60s that we is still working here now to ask, but it's something that I need to look into more, because I was really surprised to read that as well. But yes, I knew that the floor was at the level of the rest of the house, but I hadn't realized that it had been done recently. I can't really fathom why. And yes, and they've gone to the trouble of lowering the fireplace, but they didn't always have it set out as a kitchen. I'm not quite sure when. It's been a kitchen for at least 3 decades. But when the museum first opened, they had it styled as a study. So they had it styled as Gilbert White's study.
Oh, right. Oh, I see.
So some of the
That's
early pictures of the museum is it's presented very differently to how it is now.
Oh, how fascinating. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all right.
Thank you very
Got
much.
quite a lot going on in the chat. Let me just read that, see if there's any questions. So Hilly said, I noticed the tall chimneys. Do you know why they are so tall? I don't really know why they are so tall. I mean, I have to say, I'm not an architect, so but I'm guessing it's to do with the style, maybe to because the house is so sort of higgledy-piggledy to, you know, maybe it could be a structural thing. I mean, there's been a lot of tinkering with the chimney system around the house because as the rooms have changed, so have the um sort of the mantelpieces and fireplaces. For example, in what we call the study, the fireplace there has been blocked up. I know for a fact that the chimney is still in it is still there. Um, and that would have connected, I'm guessing, to the fireplace in the little parlour. But last year, a swarm of bees got stuck in that chimney and crawled out from un between the little gap in the wall between the wall and the floor, and we had a huge amount of bees in the little parlour, in Gilbert White's study. Um, and so that chimney is still in operation, even if the mantelpiece isn't. And it sort of looks like um, the fireplace in the orientation room or the 1794 dining room may have moved as well. So it might have been back to back with the one in the little parlour. And then perhaps when they added um, the sort of servants' wing, they moved it to the other wall because it sort of seems like the obvious place, and there's like a nice little sort of alcove where it sort of makes sense for a fireplace to be, but it's on the other wall, not connected with the chimney that would have been on the other side of the wall. So there's definitely been some tampering with the chimney network, but yeah, some really stylized chimneys as well. Like some of them are really, really ornate. It's worth when you're here looking up because they're some beautiful and weather vanes. There's a golden weather vane on top of the house. I mean, there's some really gorgeous architecture up there, which yeah, nobody really gets to see. Um, as the later owners added on more buildings, did they stop using older housing rooms? I think they probably used all the rooms in the house. It just depended on what they used the rooms for. I think the big difference as the house grew is that the status of the house also grew with it. So it would have started out as quite a modest, one room. The people that lived there wouldn't have been particularly wealthy. And then obviously the Whites were a parson family, so they were, working, gentry kind of level. But certainly, the Whites weren't a particularly well off family. But the house would have grown to a size that it would have been an acceptable home for a family of that kind of means. So obviously, Grandad Gilbert White was a vicar. Gilbert White's father was a lawyer that never seemed to actually practice any law, and obviously Gilbert White was a clergyman as well. So and then as the house grew, sort of the social status of the family seems to have grown. I mean, the Bibbies, it was Colonel Bibby, so you get an idea of sort of quite a high up military family. But I think all of the rooms would have gotten used, but they needed more bedrooms, they needed bathrooms, they needed billiard rooms. I mean, Gilbert White probably never felt the need for a billiard room, probably, but as time moved on, the what what the people who lived in the house needed probably grew as well. For example, Gilbert White seems to do pretty well with a couple of rooms for his one or two servants. There would probably be a room for Thomas Hall to sleep in, and maybe one for a couple of maids. But the Pears family and the Bibby family needed a whole extra wing to house their servants in. So yeah, it's oh yes, a lot of people saying that they're either coming to visit the house or um, need to come and look house. And I agree. I agree. Um, or somebody suggested that the chimneys might be tall because the area is in quite a protected area and the wind. Yes, that very true. I would suppose, particularly in a village that is, fairly well populated, I would imagine that the smoke from the chimneys probably was fairly unpleasant. Um, oh, tall chimneys might be a help to draw a good fire. See, these are people that can clearly see that have had um, would there have been any thatch in the early days? Um, Not that we know of. Um, Apparently, I mean, not that we know of. I mean, I could well be speaking here without the authority, but as far as I know, it's always had a tile roof. But I could be wrong. Obviously, in the 1500s, it very well could have been thatched. I mean, the houses next to us are thatched. Um, the houses across from us are thatched. So possibly, but Gilbert White never mentions anything about thatching. So I don't get the impression that it was thatched in the 18th century. So I would I would side on maybe not, but possibly. There are little things interesting that I wish I knew more about, like I've never been up into the rafters of the house, but apparently there's evidence of there being some fires in the past that we're not quite sure when they happened. Obviously not too bad, otherwise, we wouldn't be having this talk. um, but apparently some of the rafters have got a bit charred at one point, so it would be a lovely project to be able to sort of almost repeat the work that was done in the 80s and to see whether there was more to be found out. But it is a really interesting house. And I think when you look at the history of the house, it sort of makes sense about why you have to walk 5 stairs up for this room and then 10 stairs down to the next room, and then you turn a corner and the ceiling levels go up and down depending on which room you're in, and the window styles are completely different. And I mean, if you look at the house, I mean, the Bibbies did a good job of matching the architecture to the original part of the house, but the rest of the Bells, the Bradfords, the Shaws, the Reeds did not, the Pears did not have that same sympathetic nature to the original architecture of the house, and just chose whichever style suited them really. Because yeah, the north end of the house is very, very different in style. And obviously, the front of the house looks completely different from the back of the house, much to our visitors' confusion when they arrive in the village, expecting, because we only take pictures from the back. Have we got any other questions? Because I realise time is a ticking, and I'm sure you all want to get back to your evenings. No. Well, thank you so much for sticking with me. And I've really enjoyed doing the research for this. It was really fun. So, and please do support the museum any way you can. Obviously, this is a free talk. And there is a link in the email if you want to um, support our Fund for the Future campaign, which will ensure that we are here for another 70 years. And please do come and see the exhibition. And yeah, and if you haven't been to Gilbert White's house, or this has sparked a new love to come and visit it, but look at it in a new way, then yeah, please do. We'd love to have you. So yeah, thank you everyone.